Welcome back to Renewable New Mexico. Today's topic is Renewable Energy is Hot, and our guest is Bristol Stickney. Bristol is a solar heating engineer for SolarLogic in Santa Fe. Bristol, thank you so much for joining me here on the set.
Thank you.
So you're an East Coaster. How does a nice East Coaster like you end up here in Albuquerque?
Well, I went to high school in Connecticut and I went to college at the University of Maine. But when I left college, I was looking for a job in solar heating. And I started driving across the country looking for a solar job, who needed, some solar company that needed an engineer like myself. And I wound up in Santa Fe and I started working for the New Mexico Solar Energy Association as their staff engineer. And
so that was fairly early on in their foundation.
Yeah, they'd only been in existence for a few years. So I think I might have been the fifth or sixth employee that they ever hired, and that was in 1977.
And when was your original interest in solar energy?
Well, I used to, when I was a kid, I used to read Popular Science magazine, and during the oil embargoes of 1975, 1974, Popular Science started covering alternative energy because of the oil embargo was such big news. And so I started reading about solar heating in magazines like that. And when I was in engineering school up at the University of Maine, I actually, my last year there, I actually lived in an experimental solar heated house at the University of Maine for a whole year.
Oh, that's fantastic that they would have that even available to the students.
Yeah, especially in a state that's not well known for its solar resources.
Right, more for lobster than sun.
Yeah, right.
So that had a huge influence on you living in a space that was actually functioning.
Yeah, I think it sort of bent me in that direction. I started living in a solar house and I was giving tours to people who would come visit the solar house, and I was explaining how it worked to them. And when I graduated, I just decided I wanted to keep doing something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you got an engineering, it's an engineering degree.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what a solar heating engineer does, and the profile of someone that, if there's someone that might be interested in it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I specialize in what's known as hydronics, which is solar heating with liquid. Hydronics means based in water, water-heated liquid. And an engineer that studies mechanical engineering or thermodynamics could fall right into that pretty easily. And what a solar heating engineer does is you figure out how much heat you need in a building, and then you figure out how many solar collectors you need to provide that heat, and then you figure out a way of connecting it together and controlling it. So I spend most of my time every day connecting things together on paper, drawing piping and wiring diagrams for solar heating systems in buildings, to heat the buildings and to heat the hot water in the buildings.
What percentage of that time is spent on math versus drawing versus, I'm wondering what the profile of someone who would be ideal for to become a solar heating engineer would be?
Well, if you want to be a solar heating engineer, you really have to like math. There is some math involved, although lately the math is done by computer programs. So it'd be a good idea to be interested in running computer programs like building simulation modeling and things like that. But to use a computer program that simulates a building heat loss and solar heat gain, to use those programs you need to have a good background in math.
And the company that you're working for, are they manufacturing the components that you're designing?
The company I work for is actually, I'm one of the owners. I started this company with two other partners, and we specialize in designing and then controlling solar heated buildings. So that's our specialty. We design piping and wiring for solar heating. And then we also manufacture a control system that's specifically designed to control the solar heat in larger buildings.
And pretty soon we'll be able to do all that with our smartphones?
Well, that's exactly right. Our control system is accessible with a smartphone. It's accessible from any computer connected to the internet. And our control system allows you to not only monitor and watch the performance of your solar heated building, but also adjust it, change it, turn the temperatures up and down and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. What is your typical client like?
Well, for the last 2 or 3 years, the general construction industry has been rather depressed. So our clients have been the owners of the larger, higher end buildings. And what their interest is controlling the energy consumption of their large buildings. So for instance, a few weeks ago, we finished remodeling and then putting in a control system at a house that had an indoor pool and had several big water heaters in the basement, not just one, and many banks of solar heat collectors mounted on the ground around the house. So these, that was a high-end house, but the thing is, it ran on propane, and propane is getting very expensive. It's just as expensive as gasoline per gallon. And so if you're going to heat your swimming pool with it, it costs a fortune. So it was really important for this homeowner to solar heat that swimming pool. Otherwise, it becomes really excessive propane consumption. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of people we've been working for in the last 2 or 3 years. Big high-end homes with solar heated warm floors and sometimes indoor or outdoor swimming pools. But then we also have a small contingent of just ordinary homeowners, people with, fairly ordinary houses, 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet. But most of those people who get involved with us are burning some kind of expensive fuel, like propane or fuel oil or something like that, that's fairly expensive to burn. And usually they have radiant heated floors. Because it's very easy to solar heat radiant heated floors. And so when people discover that they can save energy and have radiant heated floors, it's almost a no-brainer, and they come to us for that.
Yeah, I would like that. Yeah. I'll have to talk to you about that. What's your favorite kind of project to work on?
Well, I like projects that have a lot of diversity, like many things going on in the building. As an engineer, those are the most interesting things to do, is to combine, for instance, a heat storage tank with a domestic hot water tank for the hot water in your sinks and showers, with a backup boiler, with radiant heated floors, and maybe with hot water baseboards, mm-hmm. maybe some ice melt zones outside the house to prevent people from slipping when they approach your house in winter.
I'm not familiar with ice melt zones.
Oh, well, it's very popular in the colder climates. Up towards the colder part of Colorado, ice melt sidewalks are pretty common. What you do is you put tubing under the sidewalk and you run hot antifreeze through it, and it melts the ice and dries the sidewalk. We've worked on quite a few houses that have at least a little bit of ice melt somewhere, like between the garage and the front door, or something like that.
Nice liability protection.
Yeah. So anyway, I like, I prefer working on, multiple sources of heat, multiple heat loads, and combining them and controlling them.
It's a little bit like a composer, not a composer, but the orchestra masters.
Yeah, like
directing all these
the conductor conducting,
that's the word.
When the heat kicks in and when it stops, and giving priority to the free heat, and leaving the expensive heat for last.
Together.
Yeah, and making sure they work together seamlessly.
So do you get a compounding efficiency by putting multiple systems together?
Yeah, absolutely. The cost of buying a big bank of solar heat collectors starts to look better and better when you realize that it not only does one thing, like heat your swimming pool, but when your swimming pool is done being heated, it can also heat your hot water for your showers. And then when that is done, it will also heat your floors. And, you know, so it gives more purpose to the same collectors. The same collectors become multifunction, which is more economical when you talk about spending money on solar.
You've been in a unique position to look at the evolution of solar energy here in New Mexico. Where do you see it heading from here?
Well, in New Mexico, I've noticed that there's two main branches and maybe a third branch of solar technology that's fairly popular. The first is, of course, photovoltaics, solar electricity. And that's what everybody thinks of these days. When you say the word solar, they think you're talking about solar electricity. But that's not what I do, and that's a completely different technology from solar heating. And then there's two branches of solar heating. One is passive solar, and the other is active solar. And they're all popular, and they all have a really good future, in my opinion.
That's wonderful. Is there one thought you want to leave people with about solar heating specifically?
Well, the one thought is that solar heating is a very practical and effective technology. It's been around in its present form for at least 30 years. So it has a long, successful track record. And if you're thinking about spending money on solar collectors, don't just limit yourself to solar electricity. Think about solar heating as well.
Great. I sort of lost track of time. I was so fascinated by the discussion.
All right.
Thank you so much for bringing your energy to the program today.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome back to Renewable New Mexico. Today's topic is walking your talk. Our guest is Larry Mapes, CEO of multiple successful renewable energy companies in northern New Mexico. Larry, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. So what brought you to New Mexico?
My stepmom and my dad came to New Mexico to Taos to open up a toy store.
Wow, that's a new story.
Yeah.
A toy store.
Yeah, that was, they had left, oddly enough, my dad at the time was in the oil industry, refining waste oil, and also was part of a company that had the very first self-service gas stations where you'd stick a dollar bill into the machine and it would pump you $1 worth of gas, which back then really got you someplace. So,
is that what connected you to renewable energy? It's sort of the back end of that.
No, not really. Maybe in some way. I really, really have been plodding forward in this industry for a lot of years, and just recently became more conscious of some of my past history. And one of it was going to NRail at a conference and seeing something that was given to me in their museum that my stepfather gave me. And he actually was leader of the program that figured out how to get metal to stick to silicone so we could have solar cells. And it was for the space program, TRW space program at the time. And so it was always part of it, but how I ended up getting into it in northern New Mexico wasn't really even on the electrical side. It was more on the solar hot water side. And I started working for a company, and before you knew it, they wanted me to become a crew chief, working for them for literally a couple weeks. But this was a time in the late 70s and 80s that it was, every used car salesman was a solar salesman. It was really quite the thing to behold at times. The industry has very much changed on this approach of doing business, and like in this state, all of us get together and help the legislators actually come up with something that's going to work for the people as well as the industry. So it's
I picture, as you're talking, I'm picturing those crime shows where they're trying to find the, where the murder is by putting the push pins in the board. You had these points in your life where things happened, and the center of that was renewable energy.
In the end, yeah, because I've always had an affinity for following wires since I was a little kid, and blowing circuit breakers when I was 6 years old, and just mechanically inclined in general. So.
Your mother must have enjoyed that.
Actually, she gave us a lot of freedom for that. My brother and I both, and very blessed with that. And then also blessed with just some absolutely fabulous mentors in my life. That just you walk in the door and you say, "Hey, I want to do this," and before you know it, 3 years have passed and you've learned something, in a very deep manner.
Yeah. Could you give me an example of one of those mentor stories? Those really fascinate me.
Oh, let's see. After high school, I went back to Los Angeles for a short time, and had roommates, and they had a band, and I thought, well, I can do the lights. That's easy. So I didn't have any money, and I went to a lighting company, and I said, well, I'd like to trade lights for labor. And so happened that the guy that I had approached was, kind of the black sheep in the industry. So that was a whole nother part of life to learn about, which I got out, completely whole. Let's put it that way. But I ran across a man named Fred Carlson, and he was a self-taught engineer, and he would never call himself an engineer. And he really taught me how to think about things like troubleshooting, how to break things apart, designing, and on some of the most intimate details. So it gave me gave me a foundation that I could never get in a school or anything, because it was real world stuff.
Yeah, and you took that real world influence and you actually walked the walk with it. That takes us to your project. Can you tell us about how you have taken that experience and made something with your hands?
Well, it's several, there's several layers to that. I actually have two companies. One's Valverde Energy, and that's a services and contracting company, and we do electrical and mechanical. I carry the licenses for that, and we do regular plumbing and heating, electrical, and of course the solar part has always been sort of the main thread through it all. And Valverde was formed, I guess the basis of it was formed around '97, and I called the state of New Mexico and said, well, what kind of licenses do I need? And they said, well, you need A, B, C, D, and so I went and did that. And being in the field in solar hot water particularly, for the last 30 years pretty much, has taught me an awful lot about what goes wrong, why does it go wrong, how do you make an installation go easy for somebody who doesn't necessarily have all of the fine details. So I formed Thermosun, and Thermosun's sole purpose was to produce product that makes it easy for any plumber to install a successful with solar hot water installation with very predictable outcome. And that has been quite successful. We have maybe 70 or more installations, I've kind of lost count, of systems that are almost identical, but it took a lot of the pain in the industry of solar thermal, of the different variations and customizations that goes on in the design and installation process.
But that's spilled over into your personal life, from what I understand. How has that happened?
Well, that's hard to say. It kind of spills over in a lot of different ways. I don't live in an off-grid house, although my building for my business has a potential to be off-grid, and it's solar heat as well, and some very, very well insulated, which is just one of the most primary things that people must think about is energy efficiency and insulation and how a house is built and put together. That those are always the long-term things to think about. And then solar heat and solar PV are great additions and also really help. But I have always taken the solar industry from a basic economic approach. That this is about economics. You buy a solar system, okay, you get 5% return on your investment over 20 years. And what amazes me is that in this country, people don't see that as a worthwhile investment, yet they'll buy a car and call it an investment, drive it off the lot, loses half the value, and sell it in 5 years. Or another great example is a 401 plan. Those 401k plans haven't done all that well. All solar systems I've installed have outperformed most financial vehicles that people have invested their life savings in.
You'd probably say that across the board.
Yeah.
Well, is there a thought that you would want to leave people with about what you have learned in these broad experiences?
Yeah, probably one of the most important things that is that solar energy really does work. It is an enormous threat to a lot of traditional business models. 20, 30 years ago it was not, but the technology has advanced and the understanding has advanced that it is now a threat to a lot of companies that provide energy and a lot of companies that are built on that. So there's a lot of forces against renewable energy. I would not have thought about that 5 or 6 years ago, or would say that. And I've lobbied professionally at the Roundhouse here in New Mexico. And the most important thing is that there has to be a political will in this country to actually get it done, and it's up to the industry to actually come up with a viable business model that makes it happen. You can't just say people should do it because they do it. There's a lot of people in this country that don't have the chunk of money to put out for it. So we're starting to see in the industry some of those business models take hold. Like California, there's several companies that do a leasing system. That's really where the industry is going to pivot, I think, in this country. Is when the political will is there, people put value to it, people say, well, when is it going to get cheaper? And it's like, energy, systems are cheaper today, energy's a whole lot more. And that's really the question is, when are you going to get tired of spending money on energy?
That's a great final thought. I can see we need more time with you, but that's all the time we have for today.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That's our program. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us next week for another episode of Renewable New Mexico. Until next time, this is Sean Wells reminding you, we are all solar powered.